What is the best way you can change yourself? Good question, my friend. The answer is a mental model. So what's a mental model? It is a deeply held belief, and we've got them about all sorts of things under the sun, from what should I eat, to what are people like out there, to what kind of career should I pursue. And once you've got a mental model, it shapes everything about how you show up to the outside world. It also shapes internally everything, how you feel, your self-talk inside your head, right? So if you take the example of what should I eat? On the one hand, you've got someone, and let's just say they're looking at a pecan pie, and they look at it, and they dive in, and they want the next pecan pie. Thanksgiving rolls around, it's just last week, and they say, I would like seconds, and thirds, and fourths, and you've got to roll them out of there. That, we will say, is a lifestyle and a mental model that underlies all that. Let's call it the fuck it diet. And on the other hand, we've got someone who's interested in being healthy. They see themselves as fundamentally healthy, and they look for habits that are going to reinforce that. That we'll call sexy. Different mental models and completely different lifestyles. Mental models change everything. When I was way back as a coach running a training and coaching firm, there was a woman, high performance, quickly advancing woman that the company said, we'd like you to work with. She needs to work on her public speaking. I went in, I evaluated her. She was terrible. She would talk and look at the ground. And I said to her, why do you do that? We got into training session 1, and right off the bat, she mastered this art of eye contact. Session 2, I come back, what happens? She's back to stinking. I said, what happened? Why are you still looking at the ground? She said, that whole staring thing doesn't feel comfortable. I don't think people like it. I said, don't like it? What feels more comfortable to you? When I'm making eye contact with you, or when I'm looking down at the ground talking? She said, all right, but that's in conversation. It's different when you're making a presentation. I said, really? I said, ask your assistant if she can help us out here. Brings her assistant in, brings 3 other people in, and I give them a presentation. And I'm making eye contact with them, one person at a time. I'm sharing an idea. And then I asked them if they like that better or looking down the ground. They all said, including her, when I made eye contact. I said, of course, from the time we're born, we seek out that connection as humans. She said, interesting you say that. You know, my baby boy, when I was talking to my husband, he pulled my head toward him because he just wanted me to make that connection with him too. I said, absolutely. So now she was convincing me it was better. But actually, I said, you're so comfortable in conversation with me. Why don't you think of it as a conversation instead of a presentation, instead of a big public speech? And she was automatically, as she thought of that, she was suddenly comfortable with this idea of having a conversation, even if there were 20 people or 50 people out there, just one person at a time, sharing eye contact, the next person sharing eye contact. See, these mental models that we hold, they change everything. In her case, it was not just about breaking contact versus making eye contact, it was conversation versus presentation. But once we've got these mental models, it changes all. What's another mental model we all have? What causes happiness? Every one of us has some model for this. So what causes happiness? Take a moment. Actually think about this. I'm going to guess your answer is different than mine. I got this about 20 years ago, a mental model from a dear friend of mine, Sri Kumar Rao, on what causes happiness. And it's nothing. Nothing causes happiness. So if you're wondering, well, why are there so many miserable people out there? It's because we've mastered the art and science of creating unhappiness. All sorts of places. Why? Well, think about it. There's actually an equation for this. Happiness equals reality minus expectations. So what happens if your expectations are higher and the reality doesn't match up to it? Suddenly, you got a lot of unhappiness. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. Now, you can still strive incredibly for mighty things without getting attached to your expectations and attached to the outcome. And that way, no matter what happens, you can accept it. Can you strive mightily and still accept whatever comes? 20 years I've tested that idea, and I believe you can. It's a mental model. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's wrong. It just works for me. And that's the question you've got to ask when it comes to mental models. Does it really work for me? Little story about a Mexican fisherman that kind of drives home this mental model. The guy is out in his little coastal fishing village, coming in on his boat, got a couple nice catches. And there's a guy who's at the pier greeting him and says, "Nice catches. How long did it take you to get them?" He says, "Not long, a couple hours." He says, "Well, why didn't you get more?" Fisherman says, "Nah, this is all me and my family need." He says, "Well, what do you do with the rest of your day?" Fisherman says, "I've got a pretty full life, actually. I sleep late, I go fishing, play with my kids, take a siesta. I'll go for a stroll around town, have some sangria, play guitar, spend time with friends. It's a full life." The banker looks at him and says, "Yeah, I got an idea for you. If you spend a little more time out on that boat, you'd be able to catch more fish and eventually replace that small boat with a nice bigger boat. And then it wouldn't be long before you could employ other people, get a bunch of big boats, a fleet of them. Then wouldn't be long before you could disintermediate that middleman and actually go straight to the processor. Once you got that, a few years later, you'd be able to move to New Mexico, open up your own cannery, take care of the distribution, the marketing, the processing, and then not long before you make it to LA, maybe New York, and then you're ready for your IPO. Once that time comes, you're ready to live the dream." Now the fisherman's a bit confused. He says, "Well, how long would all that take?" Banker says, "Not too long, 15 years maybe." Fisherman says, "Then what?" Still confused. Then the banker says, "Then what? Then you live the dream, man. You wake up late, you go fishing, you spend time with your kids, siestas with your wife, strolls, sangria, guitar." In a very real way, we already have that happiness that we're in search of. See, the question is not, is that model right or wrong? It's, does it work for you? And in my case, it does. It does. I first came upon this notion that we can choose our models when I learned of Viktor Frankl in reading Man's Search for Meaning. This is a hard read because he talks about the horrific conditions he experienced when he was going through the Holocaust. He was in a concentration camp. And in one piece of the book, he's talking about how he's naked, alone, shivering, hungry, and he's there in this cabin. And suddenly he has this epiphany. He realizes that his Nazi captors, they can beat him and they can humiliate him and they can perpetrate all kinds of these ills, awful things on him. But between the time they do that and the time he reacts to that, he reserved what he called the last of human freedoms. This last freedom is the freedom each of us has to choose our belief. To choose our belief. Now, a lot of us, we take that freedom, we take it for granted. We develop these mental models without even knowing we're developing these mental models. They just kind of sound all right at first. They work our way, take root in our system. Before we know it, it's who we are. So take, for example, a platitude. You hear probably all the time. Things work out for the best. Do they? For a lot of people, it's kind of how they go about things, just assuming so. Hard for me to believe that because my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They endured a lot of those same horrors that Viktor Frankl spoke about. 6 million Jews went through the Holocaust, died, tortured, went to the crematoria. Things work out for the best. Hard for me to subscribe to that. Now, if you take my grandfather, just a small look at his life. He was 21. He He was going off to school one day, living in Czechoslovakia, and the train that took him to school each day just kept going and going and going until he got eventually to one of the concentration camps. He spent years between Siberia, the concentration camp, a bunch of different very, very challenging, torturous circumstances. His entire family was killed, except maybe his brother. Long story short, he managed to escape. The war ended. He was on a train. And on the train, he didn't have much of anything to do with his life at that point. He got out and he went to a Red Cross Center to see what kind of help he could offer. And as he was at that Red Cross Center, there were different people he was helping. One was a woman. She had lost her entire family, her husband, brothers, sisters, everyone. She was like a rock, as he describes it. Couldn't move, just was frozen. And as he helped her get on her feet and eventually settle into an apartment, they started to cultivate a real relationship. One day, he showed up at her apartment door, and she was scared because his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he was drunk, really, really out of it. He couldn't even put a sentence together. And when he was finally able to, he explained to her that his brother, the only family member of his that he thought was still alive, was just confirmed killed. And he turned to her and he said, look, you have no one, I have no one. Let me take care of you. Let's build a life together. And so they did. And from that came my mother, eventually me. Someone I shared the story with said, maybe things do turn out for the best. I thought to myself, how peculiar someone could think that. How narcissistic I would have to be to think that because I came from this, things turned out for the best. He's not right, he's not wrong. The question with a mental model is, does it work for you? I don't believe things turn out for the best. I do believe we can make the best of them. And that story shows that. So let's say there's something about you that you want to change, something that bothers you. How do you do that? Well, let's hunt for the mental model that's underneath that and look at how you can replace it with a completely different mental model. First thing, what's bothering you? Maybe you feel bad. Someone's causing you to feel bad about yourself. Simple enough. Second question, what really is causing that? Maybe it's when someone acts hostile or rude, they're cold. Now you've got what's causing it and the harm it's causing you. Remember that last of human freedoms, right? Next step is, what's that belief you've had? The belief you've had between the time that thing happens to you and the time you react to it. Maybe it's, I don't need jerks in my life, right? Just stay away. I'm going to distance myself from anyone that acts like an ass. Simple enough. Belief a lot of people have. I've certainly had it. Next, consider an alternate belief. Maybe instead of just assuming the person's a jerk or rude or an ass, I'm going to inquire. I'm going to ask them why they did what they did. Let them know that it hurt my feelings, bothered me. Why did they do that? Now, I will never forget a story someone shared with a class of mine when I was back in college. He's kind of famous, came in. He said, I was on a train once, and I'll never forget, there was a father with his 2 kids, and they were acting like maniacs. They were banging on the train. They were sitting there yelling. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with not just them, the father just sitting there doing nothing. So he finally said, after about 15 minutes, turned to the guy and said, are you planning on saying something to your kids? And the guy turned to him sullen and he said, I'm so sorry. We just came from the hospital and they just learned their mother didn't make it. Now, what an ass this guy felt like after he said that, right? But he was probably thinking what any of us would have. I remember I've been in that situation more than once where I assumed something about other people. I was once driving. Never forget, I had my kids in the back of the car, and a car just cuts in front of us. I almost crashed into them. I'm honking, maybe a little bit more than just honking. Sure enough, this small guy rolls down his window and says, I'm so sorry. We're completely lost. And I see his wife next to him and his kids, and they all look scared. And I'm thinking, what have I done honking like this, scaring them all? What an ass I felt like. Now, once you've got that alternate belief, whether it's inquiring and checking in or whatever it is in whatever situation, the last step is finding evidence, examples from your past that show you it's true, right? Whether it's the story about that guy and the kids who just lost their mom, or me honking in this case, whatever it is, you can reinforce that model until it starts to take roots. If a mental model and concepts like that sound like things that could be helpful for you and your team as you're looking to grow your business and break through the series of ceilings as individuals we face and as businesses that we all face in scaling up, please come visit us at helm.ceo or click on the link if you see one. And I or a member of my team would love to chat and share more about how specifically the tools and the system we bring to entrepreneurs can be helpful.